either the city council or county commissioners. As such, votes taken today are recommendations, which are considered by the city council or board of commissioners during this review of the request. For special use district zoning requests, the petitioner must identify the intended use or uses of the site and give specific details on how the site will be developed. If you are addressing the board today, we would ask that before you begin your comments, please give us your name, address, and zip code for the record. Our first item of business is the approval of the minutes of the May 13th and May 27th meetings. Are there any additions or corrections?
Mr. Chair, could I ask for clarification?
Yes.
I believe Mr. Wilson said he was having technical difficulties. Is that restricting in any way this broadcast to the public in any of the media that you mentioned?
Mr. Wilson is actually in a breakout room with someone else trying to figure out what case they're here for. My belief would be, and I'll let TV 13 unmute and they can clarify. I believe it may not be live streaming at the current time, either on YouTube or on TV 13. I'm not sure, but the reason why we record it is for this reason, so that it can be played at a later time. I'm not sure if anyone from TV 13 wants to elaborate. And they may be messing with the technical difficulty.
Well, I just wanted it to be clear because our chair just said it was. So I think we need to be clear with the public. And I'm hoping that doesn't restrict any public comment because they can join us through this means.
Mr. Ryan, the meeting itself is live and anyone can join who wishes to participate. I think my understanding is that maybe the live stream may be also working, but I'm checking on that now. And what's important is that we have a recording so it can be posted later to the YouTube channel.
Thank you for that clarification. Are we back on the minutes? Is there a motion?
There is. Clarence moves approval.
Motion by Mr. Lamb. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Grubbs. Any further discussion? Mr. Murphy, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. George Bryan.
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan.
Yes.
Walter Farabee.
Yes.
Jason Grubbs.
Yes.
Clarence Lamb.
Yes.
Chris Leak.
Yes.
Mo McCray.
Yes.
Brenda Smith.
Yes.
And Jack Stillman.
Yes.
That's
Mr. Chairman, that's unanimous. Yes.
Thank you. Now I'm going to recognize Mr. Desmond Corley to review our consent agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon.
If I could just interrupt you briefly, Desmond, just to let you know the live stream is up.
All right, I am going to get started with the consent agenda presentation. As usual, please let me know if you're able to see. Actually, I'm going to stop because I didn't share my screen. Now, are you all able to see my presentation?
Yes.
All right, do you see the presentation view of the actual slide?
The actual slide.
Fantastic. All right, the first item on the consent agenda is B1, which is case W3471. This was continued from the May meeting because they needed to do a traffic impact analysis. This is a Circle K at the intersection of West Clemensville Road and Everett Road. It's proposing to rezone from LB and RS9 to LBS on about 5 acres at that northeastern corner of the intersection I mentioned before. This request would enlarge the overall area of the existing convenience store at that location and add a car wash, which you can see in the bottom right of the site plan here. This is similar to their location at Union Cross Road and Sedge Garden Road. The request takes place in an activity center. In this case, the building addresses the intersection and has good pedestrian connectivity. It has an enhanced street yard, the type 1 buffer yard. And a condition for smaller signs. They're also installing road improvements along both street frontages. So that's on Everett Road and West Clemensville Road. Staff thinks that this request is consistent with the area plan. The site plan meets UDO requirements. We recommend approval of this request.
Are there any questions for staff? All right, Mr. Murphy, do we have anyone here to speak on this case?
Mr. Chairman, we do not.
All right, I'm going to close the public hearing. What is the pleasure of the board?
I would move approval.
Mr. Chairman, board, just keep in mind, we need
Yeah.
need two motions.
And let me defer to Clarence. I think he's got it.
Okay, I apologize. This is Clarence. I move that the planning board find that the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
This motion by Mr. Lamb. Is there a
Second that.
Second by Ms. Dunnigan. Any discussion? Mr. Murphy, would you please call the roll?
I will. George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes, but don't forget Walter.
Walter Farabee.
F before G. Yes.
Well, I didn't do these, so anyway, they're kind of.
You don't mess up the rotation. You got to mess it up all the time.
Hey.
No problem, Chris.
I didn't. This isn't my alphabetical order. Lamb, Clarence Lamb.
Yes. Yes.
Chris
Yes.
Leak,
Yes.
Mo McCray,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Last but not least, yes.
Okay, that's unanimous.
And Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I move that the planning board recommend approval of W 3471.
Motion by Mr. Lamb,
Second, Jason Grubbs.
second by Mr. Grubbs. Any further discussion? If not, Mr. Murphy, please call the roll.
George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Walter Farabee,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Mo McCray,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
and Jack Steelman.
Yes.
All right, Mr. Chairman, that is unanimous.
Thank you.
The next item on the consent agenda is a general use request. It's case W 3476, proposal to rezone from C, which is the campus district, to IP, which is the institutional and public district, on 25.21 acres at the southeast corner of East Salem Avenue and Rams Drive, as well as the east side of City Yard Lane. I don't have another slide here, but the subject property is surrounded in yellow on the map to the right. The request is in keeping with the area plan, which recommends institutional and mixed uses. So staff recommends approval of this request.
Mr. Murphy, do we have anyone here to speak on this case?
I'm not aware of anyone.
All right, I'm going to close the public hearing. What is the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I move that the planning board find that the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
This motion by Mr. Lamb,
Second.
second by Mr. Grubbs. Any further discussion? Mr. Murphy, would you please?
Question. Sorry.
Yes.
This is a church and not Salem College Academy, right?
I'm sorry, what was the first part of the question?
This is the church, Salem Moravian Church, and not the College Academy.
Correct. Yes, the congregation is the property owner.
Okay.
All right, we have a second motion and a second. Mr. Murphy, would you please call the roll if there are no further questions?
Yes, sir. George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Walter Farabee,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Mo McCray,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
and Jack Steelman.
Yes.
All right,
And
that's
Mr. Chairman,
unanimous.
I'm sorry. Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I move that the planning board recommend approval of W 3476.
We have a motion by Mr. Lamb. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Grubbs. Any further discussion? Mr. Murphy, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Bryan,
Yes.
Ms. Dunnigan,
Yes.
Mr. Farabee,
Yes.
Mr. Grubbs,
Yes.
Mr. Lamb,
Yes.
Mr. Leak,
Yes.
Ms. McCray,
Yes.
Ms. Smith,
Yes.
Mr. Stillman.
Yes.
That is unanimous.
The next item on the consent agenda is B3, which is case W3478. This is a site plan amendment. You all may remember this property from last month. It was recently annexed into the city and was going through the annexation conversion process. This is at the northeast corner of Walberg Road and Shirley Weevil Road. Essentially, this request would increase the developable building area by around 9,200 square feet. Warehouse 2, which you can see sort of in the middle of the screen, in the middle of the site plan, was shown as a much smaller building on the last approved plan. A CEDA, which is a special intense development allocation for the watershed, was already approved with this case up to, or with this property up to 70% of the site. This proposal shows about 30% of the site, or just over 30% of the site being developed. Staff recommends approval of this request, and the site plan meets UDO requirements.
Thank you, Mr. Corley. Are there any questions for staff? Mr. Murphy, do we have anyone here to speak? Yes, I hear.
I'm sorry.
All right.
The CEDA isn't affected by this at all because of the small increase. What is the cutoff on that, Mr. Corley?
The CEDA cutoff is 70%. So as long as the total developed area is under 70% impervious, the CEDA won't be impacted.
No. Okay. So it doesn't even have to be reconsidered, though, at this point?
No.
Okay.
I'd like to ask one thing, please, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
In the traffic impact study that was provided, next to the last page of that report, is it by intent that they refer to the larger buildings' use as general office rather than warehousing?
Did you receive a traffic impact study with this request or the original zoning?
I'm honestly not sure which of the two, but it was dated May 4th, 2021.
Okay.
And if you'll note the bottom of page 2, under land use,
Yeah.
ITE code, manufacturing and general office.
That may be a reference, and I can't speak for what the developer intends to do with all of the buildings here, but that may be a reference to the possibility of the buildings or the properties being used as general office, or it may be inclusive of general office space that will accompany warehouse or industrial uses. I know that the site designer or the applicant is here, and they may be able to provide more specific details, but I wouldn't be able to tell you whether that has any impact on this, or I wouldn't be able to tell you what impact that has on this request. That use has been in consideration since originally rezoned. Does that make sense? Were you able to hear me?
I would just say there's a fairly significant difference in parking that would be generated by general office as compared to warehousing. I'm 100% in favor of the site plan amendment as shown. I think this may just be a technicality or a typo error on the report, and was largely asking in that regard.
Yes, man, this is Luke with Stimmel. I'm here to answer any questions on that if you have anything. So Luke Dickey, Stimmel Associates, 601 North Trade Street, Suite 200, 27101. Jack, to answer your question on that, I believe that may be a mislabel there on the general office, because the intent was for it to be warehouse distribution.
I would agree, yeah.
So what had happened is that they had Ramey Kemp rerun those numbers on this, because when the original traffic impact analysis was done, that was assumed to be kind of like more of a manufacturing facility.
Exactly.
So from going from manufacturing to actually what it should have been, the distribution or warehouse will reduce the traffic significantly. From that,
Right.
I believe that's really what those numbers are referencing. I think the
Yeah.
land use code is incorrect when they had mentioned it in this report. But
All
there
right.
would be a drastic reduction from the original TIA in the amount
Sure.
of traffic that's generated, because it's not, this 610,000 square foot is not manufacturing, it is distribution.
Well explained, Luke. Thank you very much.
Okay, if there are no other questions for discussion, would someone like to make a motion?
Mr. Chairman,
This is Clarence.
just for clarity's sake, just to make sure, because I think you were getting ready to ask me before we got, and then we had a couple questions. There, as far as I'm aware, there is no one in the meeting in opposition to this request.
All right, thank you for that. As if not, I'll close the public hearing. Would anyone like to make a motion?
Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I move that the planning board find that the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
Motion by Mr. Lamb,
Second.
second by Mr. Grubbs. Any discussion? Mr. Murphy, would you please call the roll?
George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Walter Farabee,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Mo McCray,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
and Jack Stillman.
Yes.
Okay, that was unanimous.
And Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I move that the planning board recommend approval of W 3478.
Motion by Mr. Lamb,
Second.
second by Mr. Grubbs. Any discussion? Mr. Murphy, please call the roll.
George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Walter Farabee,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Mo McCray,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
and Jack Stillman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, that is unanimous.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, I believe we have people signed up to speak in opposition for cases or for items B4 and B5. So I'm going to skip over those slides and move to B6, which is case W34A1. This is our first special use rezoning request for an accessory dwelling unit. It's a request to rezone from RS9 to RS9S on the north side of Hawthorne Road between Miller Street and Irving Street. This request, I'm sorry, here's the site plan. This request would make use of an existing structure, which you can see here highlighted in yellow, as well as existing city infrastructure. This will have little to no impact on traffic, visibility, or the intensity of the land use. It is in keeping with the recommendations of Legacy regarding housing options and choice, and Ardmore is home to a number of accessory dwellings or small multifamily buildings. Staff or the site plan meets UDO requirements, and staff is supportive of this request.
Right. Any discussion for the staff?
Mr. Chair, I had a question.
Yes.
Just based on the site plan, I was wondering if what the plan was, should this building catch on fire? I mean, can you get a fire truck or a hose back there? Is that a concern or not?
When the request went through the interdepartmental review process, Fire is a member of that team. Their comment was that they wanted the applicant to show the location of the nearest fire hydrant so that they could determine whether they would be able to service that building. It's not on the slide, you're not able to see it, but it does appear on the site plan that is in your materials and that's on our website. But they did not have any further issues.
Okay, so fire's okay with it then?
Yes.
Okay.
Mr. Corley, it's good to see an accessory dwelling proposal. You mentioned that there is no issue with traffic blockage or anything like that. Remind me what the requirements are for accessory dwelling and parking.
Accessory dwellings don't require any additional parking to be included with the parking that already exists for single-family dwellings.
So the letter that we received by email talking about concerns of blockage on Miller, particularly on school days, how do folks on Hawthorne park on the street? And is there any worry about how close this is to that Miller Street intersection and the stacking that goes on?
We did hear from Winston-Salem DOT, or they did contribute to the discussion on this. Those concerns were brought to our attention by a member of the community, the Ardmore neighborhood. They have analyzed the intersection of Miller and Hawthorne extensively, and they have recommended that, you know, if anybody has individual concerns with people parking on Hawthorne Road and how that impacts the traffic on Hawthorne Road, that they be contacted. I'm not sure that anybody from WisDOT is on this meeting right now, but their analysis was that this particular proposal is not going to have any significant detrimental impact on those conditions.
Okay, because when I'm trying to remember all the extensive history we have with these accessory dwellings. Do we have any way of knowing how many people might be living in an accessory dwelling?
An accessory dwelling would be limited to whatever the UDO restricts as far as the number of people who can live in a dwelling. I think the building code might also have something to say about that. You know, you can't stuff 20 people in an accessory dwelling and have it be legal. So I think that's going to be determined by whatever they propose when they come in for building permits.
Oh, so it'll be controlled by the building permit, and maybe Mr. Murphy knows the answer to that question.
I mean, again, from a land use standpoint, I mean, the ordinance doesn't differentiate an accessory dwelling unit any different than it does a single family dwelling. So there theoretically is no limit to it. You know, no more than 4 unrelated folks. If you have 4 or less unrelated folks, they can live together as a single housekeeping unit and be considered a family. If it's a family of 10 people and they're all related, theoretically they could live there. There's not anything in the building code that controls it based on the number of occupants. There are some things in the city code dealing with, you know, minimum sizes for rooms and those kind of things. The space itself is 576 square feet, so it's going to sort of be self-limiting. In this particular instance, you know, of course, it's not tied to this, but it's my understanding that the current owner wants to move a family member into this location. But of course, it's not predicated on it being a family member or anything else. So, you know, in the future, you know, you don't know, but, you know, I would say that it's no different than, you know, the legacy of accessory dwelling units all throughout the city that are, you know, either legal or legally non-conforming. There are no limits as far as the number of folks that can live there. And of course, you know, there'll be an item that comes back later this year, probably, where this is investigated further again. And through that process, there may be some limitations that are put on accessory dwelling units. But under the current UDO and under the current building code and under the current city code, there are no limits to the number of folks that can live there.
Okay. Well, I mean, I was fairly impressed with the parking layout and how they looked at it and everything like that. The only thing,
and I will say, you know, the one thing, and again, you know, there is no parking requirement, but if you actually look at the changes on even this particular site over the course of time, looking at the 2004 aerial to today, they've added the circular driveway, they've widened their driveway. So again, you know, I don't know if it's always been the same person that's lived there, but, you know, there's been an evolution of on-site recognition that they needed some additional off-site, on-site, off-street parking themselves. So again, if it becomes a problem, they have an area to extend that driveway to the rear through that carport, or actually to the west of that carport, to be able to get an additional parking area back behind towards the the garage. There's not anything proposed at this point to do that, but there is that ability.
Thank you.
I would just like to say thank you to the applicant for their agreement to conform to the Secretary of Interior's design standards. Greatly appreciated for that neighborhood.
All right, thank you. Are there any other questions for staff? Mr. Murphy, do we have anyone here to speak on this case?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not aware of anyone.
All right, then I'm going to close the public hearing. What is the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I move that the planning board find that the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
Motion by Mr. Lamb,
Second.
second by Mr. Grubbs. Any further discussion? Mr. Murphy, would you please call the roll?
George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Walter Farabee,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Mo McCray,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Yes.
All right, Mr. Chairman, that part is unanimous.
Right.
And Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence again. I move that the planning board recommend approval of W 3481.
Motion by Mr. Lamb,
Second.
second by Mr. Grubbs. Any further discussion? Mr. Murphy, would you please call the roll?
George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Walter Farabee,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Mo McCray,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
Jack Steelman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, that is unanimous.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, make sure my slides advance. There we go. Next and last, or the last item in section B of the agenda is case W 3482. It's a request to rezone 9.72 acres from MH and RS20 to MHS. This is on the north side of High Point Road, east of Glen High Road. Here's the proposed site plan, which would bring in and expand an existing manufactured housing development, providing a vegetative buffer along High Point Road and a secondary emergency access. It may be a little difficult for you all to see on this slide, but there is a 40-foot buffer yard along the frontage with High Point Road. That buffer yard carries around the property boundaries wherever the expansion exists. The non-conforming existing portion of the manufactured housing development is not required to provide that, but they have that wherever the expansion exists and along High Point Road. And then they have a secondary emergency access, which is required for fire and emergency services. This site plan meets UDO requirements and staff recommends approval of this request.
Are there any questions for staff?
Yes, Mr. Corley, in my visit to that, I went up and around the sort of a U in the development there. Is it the road to what I assume the east is going to be a new road?
Yeah, are you talking about this?
Well, I can't see. Where's your pointer?
In the gray.
Oh, yeah. Is that going to be a new road? And then over on the east, that a new road?
Yes, both of these are proposed drives.
Yeah. Why wasn't the other part of the U considered the other egress or whatever?
Over on the left side?
Yeah.
Come back to the.
That I cannot answer. I'm sorry.
Because you said they needed another one, and I'm saying I thought they had two because I was able to drive around a U. Is it because it isn't wide enough, or?
George, that was a fire department request for a secondary remote access. So all those new homes along the southeastern property line there,
yeah,
this provides them with a more direct connection for service, fire service on the High Point Road.
I guess I understand that. I just felt like there were two there already, and I didn't understand instead of a secondary, a tertiary.
Yeah. Yeah. Fire department has,
Yeah, there has to be, under the fire code, when you hit a certain number of units, there has to be 2 means of ingress and egress that are remote from one another. And I think that middle access is too close to the existing one to the northwest. So in order to meet that remoteness, they had to install this additional access to the southeast along that southeastern property line.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question, Mr. Corley. So I was reading in the agenda item and you mentioned about the 40-foot buffer yard on the road and where they plan to put the new units.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at the rendering here, it seems like there are the manufactured homes pretty close to the border in the existing. Is that allowed because it's non-conforming and existing already?
Yeah, so when they come in to expand a manufactured housing development, they're not required to bring the existing development up to current standards. But everything that's developed after, if this were to be approved, everything that's developed after this would have to conform. And that's why they're showing all of the new things, behind that buffer yard, but the existing manufactured homes aren't required to move.
Okay, thank you.
And Mr. Corley, I had a question. I thought I read in the staff report that there was supposed to be a open space area. Could you point that out on the site plan? I found out kind of hard finding that.
Yes, I'm gonna have to look at my book rather than pulling it up on the screen because it is difficult to see on there. Give me 1 second, please.
It's behind space number 1 to the rear.
That's what I was thinking, but I just wanted to make sure. So they have their open space, yes, behind space 1 or behind lot 1, lot space number 1 in this area.
and also further south, going
Correct.
straight south, right there. That's correct.
Yes, between 10 and 11.
Okay, are there any requirements to make that kind of usable or active, or it's just passive open space?
There's no requirements.
Okay.
Encouraged, but not required.
Right.
Are there any further questions for staff? Mr. Murphy, do we have anyone here to speak on this case?
Mr. Chairman, there is no opposition. I know that the petitioners are here.
All right, thank you for coming. Then no opposition. I'm going to close the public hearing. What is the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I move that the planning board find the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
Motion by Mr. Lamb.
Second.
Second by Mr. Grubbs. Any further discussion? Mr. Murphy, would you please call the roll?
George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Walter Farabee,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Mo McCray,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
Jack Stillman.
Yes.
All right, that part's unanimous.
And Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I further move that the planning board recommend approval of W 3482.
I have a motion by Mr. Lamb,
Second.
second by Mr. Grubbs. Any discussion? Mr. Murphy, would you please call the roll?
George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Walter Farabee,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Mo McCray,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
and Jack Stillman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, that has been approved unanimously, or recommended approval for unanimously.
Thank you.
Desmond, you're muted.
Thank you. I apologize, Mr. Chair and members of the board. The next item is C1, which is a planning board review. This is at Friends Baptist Church. It's for a private school that straddles the zoning line with Forsyth County and Clemens. This would allow a private school separate from the church to operate out of the existing church facilities utilizing, existing structure and infrastructure and parking. There is a condition that will require the landscaping that's shown along the southern boundary to be installed before the school could operate. But other than that, this plan is compliant with the UDO and staff recommends approval.
Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I move approval.
Motion by Mr. Lamb,
Second.
second by Mr. Grubbs. Any discussion? Mr. Murphy, would you please call the roll?
This is Mr. Bryan, sorry.
Sorry.
Mr. Corley, I had a hard time finding this. So the property, I mean, we don't have to have signs on these things, right?
For planning board review items?
Right.
No.
So I was trying to find the property. So it is exactly the property of the Friends Church?
As far as I'm aware, yes.
Okay. Well, I was totally lost in trying to figure out what that was. So thanks a lot.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Mr. Murphy, would you please call the roll?
Yes. I'm trying to get caught up and I mess up something on my sheets. Case C1, George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Walter Farabee,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Mo McCray,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
and Jack Steelman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, that has been approved unanimously.
Right.
And the last item on the consent agenda today is C2, another planning board review. This one is for a planned residential development on the south side of Thomasville Road at the intersection with Baden Road. This is Fiddler's Landing. Here's the proposed site plan for Fiddler's Landing. It does meet the most recent requirements for active open space and PRDs by showing an active open space in a centrally located area. It's within 660 linear feet of at least 90% of the lots that are proposed. They're also showing required thoroughfare open space along Thomasville Road and additional right-of-way dedication along Baden Road. This site plan meets UDO requirements and staff recommends approval of this request.
Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I move approval.
Motion by Mr. Lamb,
Second.
second by Mr. Grubbs. Any discussion? Mr. Murphy, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Walter Farabee,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Mo McCray,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
and Jack Steelman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, that is approved unanimously.
All right, Mr. Chair, that concludes the items on the consent agenda. I believe the next item you all will hear is B4, which is case
Correct.
W3479, and Gary Roberts is going to give that presentation.
All right,
Gary?
thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. The petitioner is Psi Delta House Corporation. The site is 1.08 acres located on the north side of Polo Road, west of Long Drive. The request is a site plan amendment for changes related to the addition of an accessory building on the northern portion of a site, which is zoned RM8S for the use of fraternity or sorority. This is Legacy's growth management plan. It's located within the yellow growth management area 3 suburban neighborhoods. And this is a zoning map showing the subject property there highlighted in yellow. Again, it's about an acre in size. There's a 2-story fraternity house on the subject property there now shown in gray. It's on the north side of Polo Road, just west of Long Drive. It's directly across the street from the Wake Forest University, which is Zone C for campus. There is a little small bit of single-family residential on an undeveloped lot there to the right on the corner of Long and Polo Road. But the rest of the zoning, in addition to the C zoning across Polo Road, is zoned institutional public, and that's mostly surface parking area. You do have a residential area further, several hundred feet to the west, zoned RS9. This is an aerial image. You can see the campus, Wake Forest to the south, and again, the surface parking area kind of surrounding this site and the surrounding development pattern. This is the existing structure. It's about 3,600 feet. It was approved around 2003. The proposed addition would be in the backyard of this. It will be a 1-story, and it will be of the same brick color, same type of material, similar architecture. So this is from Polo Road. This is looking into the site. One of the advantages of this request is they would have to get a new driveway permit, expand this concrete apron for the entrance into the development. This parking area would be formalized and paved. And as you can see in the background there, that is the dumpster. So the dumpster would actually be tucked around behind to the right, behind the proposed additional building. This is looking east on Polo Road. The site is to the left. Wake Forest campus across Polo Road. And this is a North Suburban Area Plan update adopted in 2014 that recommends institutional for this property. All the blue is institutional land use recommendation, either for churches or the campus there. Yellow would be low density, single family residential. So the request is consistent with the adopted area plan in regard to an institutional use. This is a site plan. Polo Road would be to the right. The darker orange, again, is the existing footprint of the building there. In the back is the proposed building. That's about 2,200 square feet. Some additional parking, extension of their parking, and the dumpster behind that. There is a use condition. I know there's some opposition to this request. There's one of the use conditions of the use of fraternity or sorority that there be no public address systems, and I assume that would include amplification, except within inside of structure. So there will be, with this use, no outdoor amplified music or sound. There's also a 40-foot setback required for any gathering area for this use adjacent to residential. The only residential is directly on the top of the screen there, and they're showing a 40-foot area there spaced off. This is an image of the proposed architecture in the building. And as I mentioned, it is consistent with the institutional use of the area plan. The proposed building elevation is compatible with the existing building and with the nearby structures on the Wake Forest University campus. And the request should have minimal impact on traffic. And staff's recommendation is for approval for this site plan amendment, and I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Mr. Roberts, I had a question.
Yes.
Are there any standards with regard to occupancy? I'm assuming this is an event center. Are there any limits to the number of participants and events?
No, there are not.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Couple of questions, Mr. Roberts.
Yes, sir.
You said there was a condition of no public address. The style of this architecture, seems to be similar to Joymonger's in that it has a garage door front to it. Am I correct?
Well, I'm not sure if that garage door would open or not. The petitioner is here to answer any questions.
Because I was wondering if that public address system, you said it could be inside, but if you open up garage doors, is that considered still inside?
That's a good nuanced observation that I'm not quite able to respond to, but
we certainly deal with that in our neighborhood. The other thing was, and maybe it's related to Ms. Dunnigan's question, this was described in the description as an accessory building. If someone were to live in it, would it be considered an accessory dwelling?
I would imagine that residency within this is not permitted, but I'm not able to address that.
Well, so you can't address it based on our current UDO and.
Well, this property is zoned multifamily.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if there's anything that would prohibit that from being used for occupancy, but I could not address that really definitively. So it would not be an accessory dwelling unit because that's in RS9. This is RM8.
Yeah.
There is nothing that would prohibit it under the use of fraternity or sorority. You know, there are things that deal with setbacks in the public address system and minimum site size, but the use of the property is fraternity or sorority. So there wouldn't be anything that would limit. Now, I don't know what the site plan shows. You know, if it doesn't show, you know, if it labels it as, you know, it's just a proposed building, it does not get into whether anyone is living there currently. Or excuse me, or in the future. It's just it has to go through this process because it wasn't shown on the original approved plan. So to answer your question, there is no limit. I mean, eventually, I mean, theoretically, someone could live here in the future and it would not be against the ordinance.
Okay, that helps to clarify.
Thank you. Are there any further questions for staff? All right. Mr. Murphy, do we have anyone here to speak on this case?
Mr. Chairman, we have both the petitioners and there are a couple folks that are signed up in opposition, I believe. We have for the proponents, we have Luke Dickey was still want to set. Oh no, I'm sorry, that's 3478. We have both Bobby Patterson,
Rick Malloy,
and Luke. Are you here for this case?
I am. Yes.
Okay. Well, because when I do a search by W3479, it has 3478 for you first, so I can't see what it says after that.
Okay.
So anyway,
okay.
Okay. Well, so as a reminder, our public hearing, each side will have a total of 12 minutes and there will be no rebuttal period. Once you've been recognized by the board, staff will unmute your microphone so that you can provide your comments. Please give your name, address, and zip code for the record. So Mr. Murphy, I'll turn it over to you to call.
Luke, I'm assuming you want to take the lead on this?
Yes, sir. Thank you. Luke Dickey, Stemmel Associates, 601 North Trade Street, Suite 200, zip code 27101. Thank you, Chairman and members of the board. This is again, it's a site plan amendment, so the zoning is already in place for this site that was already approved for the fraternity and sorority. As Mr. Roberts had indicated with his presentation, did a great job of kind of going over the nuances of what was being proposed is for the accessory building on the backside behind the unit, and then to formalize the parking around it. As you saw, that it is currently all gravel lot, which creates dust, noise, the disturbance, of course, even with the equipment from air handling for the existing fraternity house, to get rid of that dust will be a good thing. So it's again, the proposes to have this kind of garage type accessory building as a meeting space for alumni and use of the property. The garage doors are facing towards the back of the existing facility, so there's no proposed garage doors or anything on the back side that would face towards the main parking lot that's located behind it, or the neighborhood to the rear. So anything is opened up towards the Wake Forest campus and to the building itself. Again, the dumpster then is now tucked away to the back side of this building and not visible then from Polo. Another ask for this, kind of what they're showing in the site plan, is to add fencing along basically for the property, kind of similar to what you see on Wake Forest campus, with kind of the brick piers and then the metal kind of picket kind of fencing to go all the way around for added security and then gating of this. Right now, this site is completely open, and then anybody can walk across it or through it. So they're also looking to add fencing to help it from a security standpoint. And then also during that adds for the time when you're out of school and nobody's there, that also adds for the extra security of the campus for this facility here as well. So again, this is just kind of an accessory use building for use for meeting and alumni. And Bobby Patterson, who's the architect, and also Rick Malloy, who is a representative for the fraternity, is here. They can answer any questions and specifics about the kind of use of the facility. But staff does recommend approval. It is consistent with the area plan, and we appreciate your support for recommendation of approval this afternoon. So Bobby or Rick, if you have anything to add, I'll turn it over and for the remainder of our time.
There's 10 minutes.
Yeah, this is Rick Malloy. I actually want to thank everyone for their time and in hearing what we're trying to accomplish. I'm Richard Allen Malloy Jr. I live at 1056 West Kent Road in Winston-Salem, 27104. I'm an alumni of Wake Forest, graduated in 1991. I was the president of the fraternity. Currently help out for housing issues, mostly on the financial nature. And I actually was the one who did all the rezoning and the negotiations with Wake Forest back in 2003 to do the initial zoning. So I have been involved in this project for many, many years. And, you know, our objectives, we have hired College Corner Properties as our property manager 2 years ago. The property, we have done over $250,000 of internal renovations to that property. The alumni continue to support the organization. We're looking to raise, you know, significant dollars for this project, and it is to, you know, make it a better place for the community. We want a safer environment for the students that are there. A lot of the problems that have occurred over the years have been the inability to keep just students into the facility. There's a lot of random people that just come on site. We get a lot of break-ins, cars get stolen and broken into. So security, paving the driveway, rocks come up and hit people, you know, cars. We have the air quality issues. And the garage concept was really for the alumni to be able to have a place to gather that's not inside the house or, you know, particularly with pandemic, some type of open air space that there can be a meeting. The garage is, you know, meant to be that, just a gathering spot. It has no, you know, bedrooms. There's nobody could live in there. I mean, I guess they could with a tent, but we have no intention of that. The existing basement serves as sort of the party area for the kids. This is more of a relaxed atmosphere outside. So are they ever going to have parties out there? I can't say yes or no to that, but it is not our intent to have wild, crazy, you know, events in that space. That is more for alumni when they come back for homecoming, for big college football games, for basketball games, because the house is really for the undergrads and this space is more for the alumni. So that's the intent of our project. We have we've already raised almost $300,000. Our objective is to get to close to $1 million, and it's to continually improve that site and make sure that it's a functioning, viable, and really an example of what Wake Forest can be doing around fraternities and sororities. So that's I've probably said more than I need to, but that's where we are.
Mr. Chairman of the Board, there's approximately 6 minutes left. I'm not sure if Mr. Patterson wants to speak or not, but that's the only remaining proponent that has signed up. And then we do have 2 folks in opposition.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I would like to spend a couple of minutes if I could. This is Bobby Patterson, 125 Linker Place Court, Clemens, North Carolina. As Rick has said, the fraternities worked very hard to formalize this space through this proposal to enhance the security of the site for the students as well as for the neighborhood. And I agree with his comment that we are looking to improve the alumni experience there with the what we're calling the garage and event center. We worked hard to make that building fit in with what's there, not only with the original fraternity house that we did, but also with the campus across the street. And the garage door openings would be facing towards the existing house and away from the neighborhoods to the back. So I just want to again say that those were our design intents, and I think the fraternity has done a good job of being mindful of those and steering this project in a direction that is has positive benefits for everyone. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, that is all for the proponents. At this point, we'll turn to the proponents, the opponents, and we have both Kent Stroop and Doug Cunningham signed up in opposition. I'll leave it up to them who wants to go first. And keep in mind, you are muted.
Kent, do you want to go first?
I'll be glad to go first. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I'll do the second in opposition then.
Okay. My name is Kent Stroop, and I live at 1409 Polo Road. I'm the president of Historic Oakcrest, and I represent the Oakcrest Historic District. So for a number of years, this fraternity house has been both an eyesore and a problem within our neighborhood. There have been a number of trash issues over the years, and even before these, even before the current facility was built there and the 2 older homes were there. I have a copy. I didn't have a way of getting it to you prior to the meeting, but about 2 pages of trash complaints that date back as early as 1994. And it is currently under, I think, abatement right now that, you know, that if they have trash or anything, the city is automatically able to come on and clean the trash up immediately based on the past problems with the property. They have to comply with the city code enforcement for a period, I believe, of 1 year before they can, before they're off of that list. And so far, they've not proven to do that. Second of all, they've had numerous calls to the police. They have been in trouble with Wake Forest. If I'm not mistaken, they are currently suspended as and not recognized as a fraternity by the university. And they will have to, I think, go under a period of about 4 years without throwing parties or having functions there before they can be reinstated. And each time they do have a function or a party there, the clock starts over for that 4-year period. Well, they've been having parties on a regular basis, and so the clock has not moved as far as that goes. When they do have parties, it's very disturbing. I've lived in my family has lived in this neighborhood since 1958, and I've resided here since 1964 in the house I grew up in. When they have a party and I'm walking the neighborhood, I can hear it as far as the end of Idlewild Drive and further than that. That's at least 1,500 feet away. I think that such a facility as this, it shows 4 garage doors across the front, and then there's some glass on the west side of that. I don't know. It appears to be another garage door, so I don't know if there are a garage door on the sides of the property, on sides of this new building or not. But if they are going to have that open, they will have amplified music, and it will reverberate through the neighborhood. And to say, as the other gentleman spoke and said that this would be strictly for alumni events, I highly doubt that. I really feel like the current students that live there will be using that on a regular basis to have their regular parties and as they've done over the whole time they've ever been there. So the trash has been a problem for many years and continues to be. When they do have parties, there is foot traffic all over the place. And if you're driving along that stretch of road, you have to be very careful. Students will walk out into the street in front of you, and you have to be very cautious because a lot of them are not in a sober condition. And so you have to be extra alert when you're driving through that area when they're having a party. We do not feel like they have been a positive influence on our neighborhood over the past years. And certainly the addition of this building does not indicate to us that that would change. And that's pretty much all I have to say. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, there's approximately 8 minutes left. So with that, Mr. Cunningham.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman and the board. My name is Doug Cunningham. I live at 111 Idlewild Drive in Winston-Salem. My zip code's 27106. I am a 15-year resident of Forsyth County. Prior to that, I lived out in Davie County. So I'm a 33-year resident of the state of North Carolina. When I moved into the neighborhood, the first thing I noticed and can't mention it was just the eyesore of 1101 Polo, and it's been a constant battle, constant violations, code violations, constant noise violations. I've probably called in myself a dozen times on it in the 15 years I've lived here. But the report that Kent was speaking of was a report generated by Bruce Bailiff and sent to us. It represents 84 different code violations over a period of 27 years that started in 1994. And it includes the most current one that occurred, which was a trash violation on May the 18th. So that was the most current one. So based on their history, they don't deserve any kind of an addition to this property. The violations that have been reported over the 27 years include 8 different categories of violations. Those include housing, solid waste, weeds, trash, curbside trash, graffiti, shrubbery, junk. And I'm sure if there were some more categories, there's probably, you could add some more to that particular list. So we just feel like all this is going to do by adding another building, this is just going to magnify the current problems that we've always had, and we will continue to have based on their behavior. And that's about all I've got to say. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Chairman, those are the only folks who were signed up in opposition to the case.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, can I ask a question of the people that were?
Sure.
Mr. Stroop, you heard the condition about amplification that was mentioned by I believe Mr. Roberts. If this was approved, what kind of conditions should there be with this garage door arrangement in terms of amplification that would work with the neighborhood?
Well, I really don't know. I would assume that having no amplified sound within the building, because if those garage doors are open, that sound is going to reverberate outside and into the neighborhood. Our city county noise ordinance is that if you can hear it more than 50 feet away, it is in violation of the noise ordinance.
So you would be looking at some kind of recommendation that amplification be if the doors were down or closed.
As long as I can't hear it from 50
As long as you
feet.
can't hear it even then. Okay. And then my other question is to Mr. Malloy. Mr. Malloy, I mean, these, I'm a white guy. You know, as an alumni going to these events, I never drink and make loud noises. But what is the situation of violations to the university of the Delta Kappas? Did we lose Mr. Malloy? He was in a car.
There he is.
I'm sorry. I'm just, can you repeat the question? It was going in and out for me.
What is the history of violations with the university of the Kappa Deltas or the Delta Kappa?
We are no longer recognized by the university.
Okay.
And we have not been in our history. We had only been recognized from the time period of about 1993 to I want to say up until 2018 or so, when they did shut it down for their policies. We are still recognized by National, which is the international body for Delta Kappa Epsilon. They felt that we didn't do anything wrong. So the national fraternity still recognizes us, and that is kind of how we existed at Wake Forest for almost 50 years now. We were always off campus. We always had our own house. We've always managed our own house. We've always had our own property. And yeah, a lot of the times that we had been in opposition with Wake, it was because we sort of ran our own thing and they didn't like it, and we didn't like what they wanted to do. So, there's always been a yin and a yang between us. But at the present state, they're comfortable with us not being recognized, probably more for liability reasons. But National feels that we're doing everything we need to do. And the kids have all taken classes, and but yeah, they're college kids and they're gonna have parties. I can't stop them from doing that. But it is definitely a culture that has changed. It is well regarded by DEEC as an organization, as one of the better chapters in the country. And, with our property management, which we never had before, was engaged 2 years ago, there have been almost no violations, very few violations with even the city. And we try to be as best a neighbor as we can, and are trying to make that property even less of an eyesore. A lot of the allegations that I heard were at a time period when you had 18-year-old kids running that house with no supervision. It's just not the way it's run anymore. And it can't, because if they lose National's backing, then they're done. So that's the relationship with Wake Forest. What's the relationship with the city of Winston-Salem? Have the police ever been called over there in the last 5 years? Sorry, hold on a second. Just having issues where I am. Sorry, can you say that again?
I'm interested in the relationship with Winston-Salem. Have the police ever been called over to this facility in the past 5 years?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's no doubt. But if there was a noise violation or something that was going on, they would have to turn down the party and close the party, and it would be over. It's like anybody else that violates a noise violation. They get a bill, they get a ticket, and they have to shut down the party. It's no different than any other.
If the fraternity has sat down with the neighborhood and tried to work through some of these issues?
No. Well, I would say not since 2003, 2004, when we built the property. They would be open to that, I'm sure. There is also They're also, we're sort of unaware of neighbors at this point because Wake Forest has basically bought everything around us. So I think the Idlewild people and the residents on Idlewild are pretty far away. So I'm not sure, you know, we've just basically, we just thought Wake Forest owned everything at this point, but I'm sure they would be open to talking to the neighborhood.
Thank you.
Mr. Malloy, this is Chris Lee, Chair. Is this the first time that you've heard that the neighbors are in opposition, that there have been issues still with the neighborhood?
Yes. In fact, I think these opposition pieces that just came up, we were prepared to go to all the neighbors as we did for the rezoning in 2003, 2004, but then we're told we didn't have to because Wake Forest was our only neighbor. And I did reach out to Wake Forest and sent them the plan and said, this is what we intend to do. And if you want to talk about it, please contact us. And Reed Morgan and Mark Peterson didn't they said, yeah, thanks for telling us, but they didn't put up any opposition. I found out about the opposition in the neighborhood 15 minutes before this call.
So I think it was Mr. Stroop or someone said that there was a violation as recently as May of this year. So when violations occur, who gets those notices?
Probably College Corner Properties, our property manager, and they would go over and fix the problem right away. And May 18th sounds like the end of that, you know, that's graduation. So my guess is there may have been, you know, people dumping stuff towards the dumpster and there might have been trash outside the dumpster. But if that lasts for more than a day, I'd be surprised, simply because we have a property manager that takes care of these things for us, and we have for 2 years now. So that, you know, we're trying to do, you know, it was an ad hoc committee of a couple of guys trying to manage a fraternity house as alumni. And we brought in professional management that has done a tremendous job over the last 2 years. They take care of all the rents. We have actual leases. Parents are notified if the rents aren't paid. You know, this is more, we're making this more and more of a business every day and running it like a business. We have a full board. I've brought in past people, the people that are involved in the organization at the board level. These are all top business people in Winston and other communities. You know, the chairman of the CFO of the Hilton Head Chamber of Commerce is our treasurer. So, you know, we are trying to make as many strides as we can. The reality is we're dealing with 18 to 22-year-old kids, right? We're trying our best to manage that in a way that has not been managed in the last 25 years. So, I mean, that's all I can tell you. And I live locally now, and I used to live in New York City, and now I live locally. So I've taken on a lot more, probably more than I ever wanted to at this point in my life, but here I am. But they're trying to do what they can do.
All right, my rain suit.
Right. Are there any other questions for anyone?
Do we have the opportunity to respond to that?
Mr. Chairman, just to keep in mind, the public hearing is closed. That was a direct question.
Right.
I mean,
So,
it's your discretion, but.
Yeah, so Mr. Cunningham, the answer is no, unfortunately, but.
Okay.
Okay.
Very good, thank you.
All right. So with that, if no one has any other questions for anyone, I'm going to declare the public hearing closed.
Whoa.
George, you're muted. George, you're muted.
If it's still open, then let Mr. Cunningham speak.
Well, that was a question directly to Mr. Malloy. It wasn't a question there. He wants to do a rebuttal, and there is no rebuttal period during this time.
I just want to clarify something if I can with our
Do they
remaining
still have time, Chris?
I don't think we used up all of our time.
I've already erased it. So, I mean, the answer to the question is no, they didn't use all their time.
Okay, well, let me ask Mr. Cunningham. Mr. Cunningham, is the information that was given by the other people correct?
The other people that were just speaking, what?
Yes. About.
I just wanted to clarify that he had mentioned that have a new property manager over the past couple of years, and he did know very few violations. There's been 11 violations in the last 2 years. That's on the report that was produced by Bruce Bailiff. So there's been 11 violations that we know of that are on record, not including the number of times the police have been called in the last 2 years. So I wouldn't say that their property managers have done a good job.
Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions for the proponent or opponent before I close the public hearing again? All right, so the public hearing is officially closed.
Mr. Chairman, I've got a question for staff, actually.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Murphy or Mr. Roberts, whoever is best suited to answer this question, just for the benefit of the board members, can you review the standard that we as a board are supposed to use in evaluating this request?
Right.
Just so we're all on the same page about what we're supposed to be looking at.
Yes, this is a site plan amendment. The use fraternity or sorority was determined to be an appropriate use of this piece of property in 2003. The request before you is a site plan amendment, which comes through and acts similar as a rezoning, but it's really an approval of a revised site plan to add additions to properties, to, add an additional building, which is the case here. Obviously, as part of that, you can consider the impacts that the proposed building may have on surrounding property owners, i.e. if something's getting closer to surrounding properties, if there are, issues on the site. But the use of fraternity, in this case, it's the use of fraternity to sorority house, but this is a fraternity that's been on this property, at least in this particular iteration. I believe there was a house before this one, but has been on this property since 2003. So the use determination has been made. The determination needs to be made here is whether or not the changes they are contemplating and putting before you as part of a site plan amendment are consistent with the ordinance, and what the impacts of the additional changes to the site plan will have on the larger community.
Thank you.
All right. Is there any further discussion? If not, I will ask for the pleasure of the board.
Mr. Chair, I would move denial, and I do it on a couple of bases. I think our city council has been aware of the issues of this for a number of years. Our city has put a lot of effort into this. I really commend the fraternity for coming up with this idea and for certainly addressing needs of alumni, but I think they need to establish a relationship with the neighborhood and their impact on the neighborhood in order to request an expansion like this. So I would move denial.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, just point of clarification, the first recommendation before would need to be compliance with the comprehensive plan. And, again, I don't want to presume, but I believe that from a comprehensive plan standpoint, since fraternity and sorority is a recommended use in the IP district, and this is zoned IPS, and that's what the area plan recommends, I would make an assumption that it would probably be consistent with the area plan. So probably we have to do two motions. I just want to make sure we put that out there before we get a second on Mr. Bryan's motion to deny the request itself.
Okay, and this is case what?
This is B4. It's case number 3479.
And it is actually zoned RM8S.
Okay, I'm sorry, but fraternity and sorority is appropriate in RM8, and RM8 is an appropriate use in IP.
Okay, so you're saying even though this is a site plan amendment, we need the two motions?
Correct.
Okay, then I move that the planning board find that the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
There's a motion by Mr. Bryan.
I'll second that.
Second by Ms. Dunnigan. Any further discussion? Mr. Murphy, would you please call the roll?
Yes. George Bryan,
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan,
Yes.
Walter Farabee,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Mo McCray,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
and Jack Steelman.
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, it's 9-0 unanimous, consistent with the comprehensive plan.
And then, Mr. Chairman, I would move that the planning board recommend denial of W 3479.
So
I would
motion,
second that.
we have a motion by Mr. Bryan, second by Ms. Dunnigan. Any further discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. Unruly neighbors are difficult, no question about it. And, I don't know how many complaints there have been, but it sounds like there've been a lot of complaints. I do see parallels though between this, it really is essentially a part of the student community. I know it bleeds into just like Chapel Hill bleeds into, parts of, or UNC bleeds into residential areas in Chapel Hill, but I see parallels between the entertainment district downtown in Winston-Salem with respect to noise and things like that. Folks know that there's probably going to be some noise, and we're actually encouraging, some night activity and things like that. I see some parallels. I'm not saying that I agree that they need to have 18 violations in the last couple of years, but it's something to think about. It really is literally surrounded by Wake Forest. Those are my comments.
And if I can, Mr. Chair, I think too that the site plan has done a great deal to add a beautification element to the surrounding use, right? So the replacement of the gravel driveway, as well as additional parking, creates a more orderly component, as well as I think that it's an appropriate additional use on a fraternity sorority building to have an outdoor meeting area. And the notion is that the zoning's in place. We're just providing a little bit more space for them. So I'm not really sure what to tie the denial to, since they've been so cautious to put up a plan that seems to satisfy a lot of our wants in the growing city, as well as growing this attitude of Winston-Salem being a young place where people want to come to college and want to be and do these activities that we associate with universities and colleges. So I'm a little, I think that I'm taken aback by the denial motion because I do think that the use is appropriate.
Yeah, I'd like to speak to that and address that, Mo. My concern really is with the impact that this additional building, I understand it's a site plan amendment, but my concern really is with the existing properties and the impact that this change will have on them. Just looking at it, you wouldn't really necessarily expect that given how far the neighborhood is, but hearing from the neighbors, I was just very dismayed to hear about the track record of the existing fraternity there, and I think we really do need to take that into consideration. If they had a better track record, I would see no problem with this. But given what we know, given what we have heard about the impact, and especially since there is no limit on the number of people who can be gathering here. I just see it as too impactful in this case.
I'm just not sure we can really be in a position to say that use like that, but the partying is something that we're approving today. We can play flip cup in a basement or outside. It doesn't need to be in this garage dwelling unit. So I don't think that behavior is what we should be policing or trying to have a vote in. However, that is my opinion, and this is a board, and we all have a vote.
So hold on, I see two. So I'm gonna recognize Mr. Grubbs first, and then Mr. Farrer.
Yeah, that was my reason for asking staff to clarify the standard that we're supposed to be going by. We're not trying to decide whether fraternity and sorority is suitable in RS8. It may or may not be. We're not trying to decide what's. We're looking at a limited scope of things here, and as George said, I'm a Wake alum. I'm disappointed to hear what I'm hearing from the neighbors about the behavior. Quite frankly, it's not what I would expect out of folks that are soon to be graduates of a university that a lot of us hold dear. And that's really disappointing, but the fact remains that I'm not on this planning board to decide whether the Deeks party too much or not. I'm on this planning board to decide whether the site plan amendment is in conformity with our ordinances. And I think we have to be careful. It's a slippery slope when you start looking at things that you're not supposed to make decisions that are pretty limited in scope.
Yeah, I was just going to agree with Mr. Grubbs, Ms. McCray, given that the zoning is already in place, the use is in place, and we're here to judge the site plan amendment, which seems fitting given the use. And they do seem to be making strides to improve some of the issues with the parking lot, and the design seems appropriate. I do think at this point, granted, these are issues between neighbors. The larger neighbor is the university. The property is surrounded by the university. But also at this time, if these issues have been brought up, this is the opportunity for the house and the fraternity to engage with the community and come to some kind of understanding. But given this place and space that we're in right now, I think the design and the use stand.
Thank you. Ms. Smith, Mr. Stillman, would either of you like to make a comment?
I would. I just think I think it's commendable, and we all feel concerned for the communities that we're working in and making decisions about. So that's a valid point to look at that and to listen to everyone involved in that. But I think we're right. My opinion is we have to be aware of what type of impact we actually can consider in these decisions that we're making, and that we really need to be careful and stick with what our responsibilities are as a zoning body, not necessarily the bigger picture issues that we're all aware of, but we have to stick within our areas that we have the authority to do.
Thank you, Mr. Stillman.
Yes, sir. I'll just say one of the wisest persons I ever worked with in commercial real estate taught me early on to memorize the list of things I am not, so that I can remember what I am. And what I am not is a policeman. I'm not a sanitation enforcement person. I'm not a noise ordinance enforcement person. All of those points are valid and disturbing, but they're beyond our scope of responsibility.
Thank you. And being a proud Wake alum myself, as several of us are, I am very disappointed, especially since we stand for pro humanitate. I'm very disappointed that we're not being good neighbors. However, again, it's very mindful of what we're tasked to do. And unfortunately, we're not the behavior police. So there is a motion and a second on the floor for denial. Mr. Murphy, would you please call the roll?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. George Bryan.
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan.
Yes.
Walter Farabee.
No.
Sorry, I'm just writing the note. Jason Grubbs.
No.
Clarence Lamb.
No.
Chris Leak.
No.
Mo McCray.
No.
Brenda Smith.
No.
Jack Stillman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, the motion fails by a vote of 2-7.
And Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I move that the planning board recommend approval of W 3479.
Motion by Mr. Lamb.
Second.
Second by Mr. Grubbs. Any discussion?
Yes, I want to remind the board that many times in history, additions or requests for zonings of nuisance property has precipitated a denial. And I think if you knew the history of the University Area Neighborhood Association in trying to negotiate with the development along Polo, that you would appreciate the balance that is necessary in that neighborhood. And you would be aware of the fact that other fraternities and other groups, and Wake Forest itself, has been very active in negotiating with the neighborhood, and I am not hearing that in this case. So I continue to feel like there is no obligation whatsoever that we expand something that has caused a nuisance to the neighborhood. And if we do it, it is upon us when we expand that and encourage it. So I would encourage folks to vote against approval.
Mr. Murphy, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. George Bryan.
No.
Melinda Dunnigan.
No.
Walter Farabee.
Yes.
Jason Grubbs.
Yes.
Clarence Lamb.
Yes.
Chris Leak.
Yes.
Mo McCray.
Yes.
Brenda Smith.
Yes.
And Jack Steelman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman of the board, the vote is 7-2 to recommend approval to council. Just so it's on the record, I did send the petitioner, or I did send Luke an email just encouraging them to probably a good idea to meet with the neighbors, given the fact that if they do not and it goes to council and they get denied, they can't do anything for a period of 1 year and bring in the same request for 2. So obviously it would be with a wise decision for them to meet, not only because of the rezoning, but just because it's a good thing to do. But I did send them an email to that effect.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris.
Mr. Chairman of the board, I believe we're to item B5.
That's case W3480. I believe the staff is Amy McBride for that case.
Okay, good afternoon. This is for case W3480. Petitioner is Winston-Salem Business Adventures, LLC. This site is 1.83 acres located at 5217 Germantown Road, and they are requesting a general use rezoning from RS9 to HB. This is the growth management area activity center map. You can see the general vicinity of the site off of Germantown Road right there. This is the location map. You can see the subject area in yellow that is included in this request. There is some additional property to the east, but that is not included. And you can also see the in the green, the subject properties that were notified for this rezoning. And again, here's an aerial image of the site. I'm not sure if you're able to tell, but there is a residential structure on it that is occupied. And then just some additional land towards the rear of that property and then going back. This is the subject property viewed from Germantown Road looking towards the east. You can see the residential structure here. Again, this is the driveway. So this is standing across Germantown Road. This would be just below the house, and the driveway extends back. This is Germantown Road looking south down to Patterson Avenue. Subject property is on the left. This is looking north. You can see the subject property and the signage to the right, and it's commercial uses just across the street. And this is standing in the driveway of the subject property, looking west across. And again, you can see that commercial use that's across the way. This is the area plan map. So you can see that they do recommend intermediate density residential for this area. And it's pretty much on the north and the west side, surrounded by commercial use, and then further to the east, predominantly residential. So the proposed zoning is consistent with the adjacent properties, which are currently zoned HB. The area to the east of the parcel will maintain the RS9 zoning of the adjoining parcels, and the site has access to water and sewer and good road access, and is suitable for a variety of residential and commercial uses. And the recommendation for this is approval. No site plan was proposed at this time, so all the uses would have to be considered.
Are there any questions for staff?
Yes, I had a question.
Ms. Dahlia?
Ms. McBride, you mentioned that because of the existing zoning that surrounds this property, you see it as consistent. I'm just wondering, because of the area plan recommendation, which is different, would you consider it inconsistent with the area plan or consistent? Just technically, I'm trying to understand that.
Well, I mean, I think it's just with the general vicinity of the commercial uses that are so close. There is obviously a residential component more towards the north of the property. I don't, again, without a site plan, we don't know what the applicant's plans are for the future of this. It currently is a residential property. He does have a tenant in that house. So I can't speak to what his, future plans are for it, but I would say just looking at the trending of the growth towards that area and knowing that the additional properties below and next to it are zoned HB, that it would.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions for staff? Mr. Murphy, do we have anyone here to speak on this case?
Mr. Chairman, we do. We have the petitioner, Tracy Myers, who I believe is also the property owner. And then we also have in opposition, Erica Lowry. So I believe we'll hear from Mr. Myers first.
Good evening. My name is Tracy Myers. I live at 1601 Conrad Road in Louisville, 27023. I want to thank you for your time this evening. My family's had businesses here for 101 years. I really believe in the growth in this area and supporting this area. I started an athletic training program for young people approximately 9 years ago in a rental property, not one that I owned, but I rented. And we have outgrown those properties. I purchased the property that we're speaking of, and my initial thought was to, it just wasn't an attractive piece of property, just being blunt with you. I purchased a piece of property next to it and revitalized that entire corner of Germantown and Patterson. And now my goal is to move up the hill. Well, that property's been sitting empty since I bought it, not where the residential house is, but the commercial piece next to it. And when we outgrew this last facility, which primarily serves young people ages 15 to 19. Majority come from homes that are less fortunate. We train them not only in, many form of athletics, but nonetheless, we also train them in the back end, how to run the business. So they'll be equipped to go into the workplace. The person living in the home now, the residential piece of property that I'd like to have rezoned, He's actually, he's an employee as well, and he's the groundskeeper for that piece of property. So with that being said, the plans for the piece of property right next to it, which is why I'm rezoning the residential piece, is to put up a facility for the kids. It's low traffic. They train at night, 3 hours a night. And that's when we teach them. That's when they're coached, and that's when they're mentored. Where this building is going, it's already commercial, but to get that building built the way I need it built, I need that residential home zoned commercial as well. But thank you for your time, and happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Chairman, just as a reminder, Mr. Myers did speak to specific uses. This is a general use request, so the board needs to consider the full range of uses. So I just want to make sure to continue to reiterate that. With that, Mr. Chairman, there was no one else sign up as a proponent. So if no one had any questions, we could hear from the opposition, but I don't want to step on your toes, but I did want to mention that.
All right, thank you. All right, Ms. Lowry, I think you are next up. If you would state your name, address, and zip code for the record.
Yes, my name is Erica Lowry. I live at 5478 North Ridge Drive, Winston-Salem, North Carolina, 27105. In fact, we're behind, where I live is behind that house. And so thank you for allowing me to speak. The only thing that I had, like I said, was for general use. I was a little concerned about, we already have traffic up and down that road like you would not believe. I was concerned that if we would have any more dealing with traffic, and what can it be turned into is the reason for my opposition. And since it said general use, that means that could be anything. And I was more concerned about what would that do if it turns even more commercial to the property values of the people who live directly behind this particular house. And so that was my main concern about this. I understand, you're trying to do something. I commend him for trying to do something very positive, but I also know that's a busy road, and trying to get even more and getting more and more commercial commercial on that road. Actually, the road needs to be widened, but that's another story. But I'm just concerned about what would happen with what type of commercial use it would have, and what it would do to the property values of the people directly behind of that. If you look at the map, my street is on there, what you showed earlier. And that's the only reason I have some opposition to it. I'm not against progress, but I am against progress at the expense of others. I know I didn't use it well.
Thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions for either Mr. Myers or Ms. Lowry? Okay, then seeing none, I will declare the public hearing closed. Thank you both for coming. What is the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I move that the planning board find that the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
Motion by Mr. Lamb.
Second.
Second by Mr. Grubbs. Any discussion? All right, Mr. Murphy, would you please call the roll?
George Bryan.
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan.
Yes.
Walter Farabee.
Yes.
Jason Grubbs.
Yes.
Clarence Lamb.
Yes.
Chris Leak.
Yes.
Mo McCray.
Yes.
Brenda Smith.
Yes.
And Jack Stillman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, that part is unanimous.
Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence again. I move that the planning board recommend approval of W3480.
Motion by Mr. Lamb.
Second.
Second by Mr. Grubbs. Any discussion? Mr. Murphy, please call the roll.
George Bryan.
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan.
Yes.
Walter Farabee.
Yes.
Jason Grubbs.
Yes.
Clarence Lamb.
Yes.
Chris Leak.
Yes.
Mo McCray.
Yes.
Brenda Smith.
Yes.
And Jack Stillman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman of the Board, that recommendation is unanimous for approval. I believe that brings us to item B8 on your agenda, and that is whose case is that? I'm sorry, Desmond.
That case is Elizabeth Collier's.
Okay.
Thank you. Good evening. The petition before you request is F1603 Kimberly L. Gardner. The site is a 1 acre tract on the northeast side of Bowman Road, north of Pine Hall Road. The request is for general use zoning from the AG Agricultural District to RS20 zoning. And this is the legacy map. You can see the site is located within the Rural Area Growth Management Area 5. The location map, you can see the site in yellow with the posted sign on the northeast side of Bowman Road, just north of Pine Hall Road. You can see the general area is large lot development, some agricultural uses. The predominant zoning in the area is agricultural district, and the existing, the subject site for the rezoning is developed with 2 manufactured homes that are existing on the site today. An aerial overview of the site will show you the, again, the large lot character of the site, the surrounding area, low density development, and the rural agricultural character in general with the around the existing developed site. This is the subject site on Bowman Road, the northeast side. You can see the existing manufactured homes on the lot with gravel driveways with connections to Bowman Road. This is a view, the subject site is to the left, looking towards the south towards Pine Hall Road. And again, the rural character, large lot development. You can see ribbon pavement, no access to sewer or water services along this road. So it's septic and well service. This is the subject properties to the left. This is looking more west across Bowman Road from the subject site. That's a more agricultural area and use. And again, just a sense of the rural character around this site. The summary, this proposal could allow 2 existing homes on a single family lot to be subdivided. The most prevalent zoning district, as you saw around the site, is agricultural district. There's no RS zoning districts noted within an approximate 2-mile radius from the site. And rezoning rural sites to more intensive suburban zoning districts is discouraged in the Northeast Rural Area Study and generally not supported in rural areas, GMA 5 of legacy. And staff recommendation would be for denial. And I'll be happy to entertain questions from the board.
I've got this, Brenda, I've got a question. Is there a specific lot size in AG?
Yes, there is. The minimum lot size in the AG zoning district is 40,000 square feet, which is just under an acre.
Right. So if you are a farmer, I grew up on a farm, you couldn't sell less than an acre of your land to someone else. You'd have to sell it. Oh, or what I'm trying to understand, it's not going to change anything. So to have a separate lot ownership, you could have less than an acre, but it couldn't have residents on it.
So the request is for general use RS20 minimum lot size of 20,000 square feet. So hypothetically, if the land was subdivided, there would be a home on each lot.
Right. I guess my it's more of a general question. I understand what this specific request is, but in an agricultural district, you would have to sell someone property, at least by an acre lot, in order for them to then put a house on it.
Correct. It would be 40,000 square feet minimum lot size in AG zoning to sell off a lot to build a single family home.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
It does. I'm from the country of, you sell your son a lot and then your cousin a lot, and they're not necessarily a specific size. So I'm just clarifying in my own mind, I guess, of if you were to do that under the way the zoning is done here, you would have to sell at least an acre size lot for someone to put a residence on.
I think perhaps the only exception is if a smaller portion of a larger tract were sold and combined with another lot
Right.
adjacent to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
There, Ms. Collier, this is Clarence. There's no sewer there, you said, right?
That's correct.
It's GMA5.
Correct.
Okay. And you'll have to remind me, do we, I know that they had to do percolation testing and things like that, but we could do, we can actually end up with a 20,000 foot lot if it's RS20, even though that site the soils may not perk, but they could gang their septic and be an off premises septic field that could allow for a house to be built on a 20,000 foot lot, even though there's no sewer out there, right? I mean, so they get RS20, they might possibly be able to build a house on a 20,000 square foot lot, even if the soil is not sufficient on that particular 20,000 square foot lot. They could tie into a septic field off the lot that would allow them to build a house. Is that right?
I believe that's the case. However, and the petitioner could elaborate, but my understanding is that there are already existing separate septic and separate well systems for each existing manufactured home on the site today.
Yes, both homes have been there 20 plus years, and they each have their own driveway, their own septic, and their own well.
Clarence, just to clarify, I mean, what you're asking, yes, that's correct. You could do that. There are provisions in the state health department guidelines that essentially, I mean, you can do anything as long as it's engineered and reviewed by environmental health. There are always ways where you could provide sewer, because here the issue is, since it's not sewered and, not theoretically sewerable, we want to try to, keep that area for larger lots. So you have repair areas, so it doesn't have to be heavily engineered, because it's not anticipated, at least at this point, to be sewered in the future. So that's where, it's in the GMA 5 rural growth area. So that's why the area plan and staff's recommendation don't support what's being requested. It's obviously a board decision and ultimately a county commissioner decision, how both the planning board and the county commissioners want to handle this. As Ms. Gardner did allude to, this is a situation where both of these homes have been here for a significant period of time, approved through the Board of Adjustment special use permit process for a primary and a secondary dwelling. And I'll let Ms. Gardner testify whenever we call her for the public hearing, whether or not now, it's been that way for a number of years, but obviously there's an impetus here to try to subdivide this property to get them in separate ownership. And I'll let her explain that, but that's kind of gets back to our recommendation. It's not that it can't be done. It's just from a land use perspective, we don't think it should be done.
Right. Can the Board of Adjustments continue helping out in this scenario, or have we reached a deadline? Or
well, no, I mean, the Board of Adjustment can continue to renew the manufactured homes. That's not an issue. The special use permits can continue to be renewed forever. It's just that they can't approve a variance for the lot size for AG because it's existing conformity, and basically you have a primary and a secondary manufactured home approval process. They don't have the power to grant a variance for to basically allow a substandard lot whenever there's already use of the property. So the Board of Adjustment can't help here. The remedy in this case is to rezone should the planning board and the county commissioners approve such.
Right. Okay. One last question. In ag zoning, can you do a PRD and end up with 20,000 square foot lots? You can, can't you?
Or small.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
On what minimum lot size?
Well, the minimum lot size in AG is 40,000 square foot and 150 foot lot width. RS40 is a 40,000 square foot lot size, and I believe 100 foot lot width. Is that correct? So
Yes, that's correct.
The difference is the lot width between ag and RS40. As I was explaining to Mr. Bryan had called earlier today on this, and I don't want to call ag a vanity district because it's not truly that, but I think there was a recognition whenever the comprehensive plan was done that we want to recognize the AG property different to recognize that agrarian nature, but it doesn't preclude someone from doing a subdivision. It doesn't preclude someone from building a house. It's just called ag, and you can still do residential development within it. It just has a slightly different standard than RS40.
Right.
So
And then lastly,
if we approve this, we would not be setting a precedent or anything, would we? It would just be.
I mean, again, that's a legal question. I think it could be argued either way. If you make the finding that this should be approved, and again, we haven't heard from Ms. Gardner yet, so I don't know exactly what the situation is. But again, that this is a particular situation to help them be able to subdivide this piece of property because they need to be able to convey one. It needs to be in separate ownership. I mean, I think it could be so narrowly crafted that it wouldn't necessarily set a precedent. But with that being said, if someone takes a look at the zoning map and then sees RS20. They may say, well, they got RS20, we want RS22, even though, the situation may warrant it in one case and not in another. That's kind of the question. It's not a hard and fast, it's hard to answer because it really just depends on the situation. But, I don't necessarily think it would set a precedent. But again, from an area plan perspective, we need to respect what the plan recommends. So that's why our recommendation is for denial.
and then the last question for me, I think Chris probably, we're getting ready to look at GMA5. Is that not correct? Isn't that coming up pretty soon?
Yeah,
So
that's why I said what I said. I know at some point, I believe there's supposed to be a discussion between the Utilities Commission and the Planning Board to look at future sewerability again in preparation for, I believe, getting ready to do a new comprehensive plan. We've, basically the basins and things that we have been looking at over the life of the current plan, the last 26, 27 years, we kind of had hard and fast boundaries on, where we anticipated sewer going, but we haven't revisited that since then. So yes, and Kirk, I'm not sure where it is on the work program, but I will say I know that is something that's contemplated coming up sometime in the near future.
So Chris, that's actually going to steal the thunder for my work session update later, but that's the main event for work session in June. Is having Courtney Driver come from the Utilities Commission.
All right, so we're not getting ready to, a month from now, come up with a plan to where we're going to give RS20 by right to ag, are we? We're not getting ready to do anything like that. Okay.
No, again, as Chris said, this would be kind of a conversation about where the Utilities Commission may see sewer expansions into those areas currently. And armed with that, when we go into the comp plan update process over the next couple of years, that's when we'd think about changing the GMAs.
Okay. All right. And I just want to make sure I heard this right. An ag owner can bring in a PRD on ag zone land and end up with 20,000 foot lots. If all the parameters work. Assuming
all the other requirements are met as far as minimum acreages for a PRD, buffer yards,
thank you,
open space, etc. Yes.
Well, this is Brenda again. The 20,000 square feet ties into the regulations as far as what can have a septic system and a well together.
Yep.
Correct. So you would still have, but that's sort of what I'm weighing back and forth is you're not going to approve something that would be not feasible as far as for future use of the property, that you would never have that limited space to expect to have a septic system and a well together. But that 20,000 square feet does accommodate that, if I'm remembering correctly.
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay, are there any further questions for staff? All right, Mr. Murphy, I think we have people here to speak on this matter, correct?
Mr. Chairman, we have the petitioner, Ms. Gardner, is here, and there is no opposition. So, Ms. Gardner, if you want to go ahead.
Yes, Kim Gardner, regarding the 6439 Bowman Road. Yes, I just wanted to divide it. When I originally put the home in 20 plus years ago, and my grandmother moved there in the second home, and I believe since then we've obtained a permanent permit for the second home, but she has since passed away and my cousin lives there, and you know, life changes. I don't need two homes anymore. So I wanted to divide it so that I could sell the original property, but I'm going to keep the second home. So, and again, as I said, each home has its own driveway, its own septic, its own well. One of them's been there 21 years. One of them's been there 20 years. So that's it. So I don't know. Do you guys have any questions for me?
Ms. Gardner, if we could just have your address and zip code.
Oh, yes. I currently live in Rowan County, 210 Trailing Pine Lane, Cleveland, North Carolina, 27013.
Thank you.
All right.
Chairman, I was going to say that's all for proponents and opponents.
All right. Then I will close the public hearing if there are no questions. And what is the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I move that the planning board find that the request is inconsistent with the comprehensive plan.
Moved by Mr. Lamb.
I'll second that.
Second by Ms. Donegan. Any discussion? Mr. Murphy, would you please call the roll?
Yes. Mr. Bryan?
Yes.
Ms. Donegan?
Yes.
Mr. Farabee?
Yes.
Mr. Grubbs?
Yes.
Mr. Lamb?
Yes.
Mr. Leake?
Yes.
Ms. McCray?
Yes.
Ms. Smith?
Yes.
Mr. Steelman?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, that is 9-0. That is not consistent.
And Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I further move that the planning board recommend approval of F 1603.
We have a motion by Mr. Lamb.
Second.
Second by Mr. Stillman. Any discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to explain why I will be opposing this. I really think that we do need to respect our area plans, especially in GMA 5, because we have had a lot of cases in GMA 5 with requests to rezone ag land. In fact, I think in April we had one, and that was considered to be consistent because it was in a kind of a transitional area. In this case, we don't have a transitional area. And we might be creating a new one problematically. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's a good idea to revisit GMA 5 so that we can have a consistent policy that we do adhere to, you know, and so that we can, I think the goal is really to preserve the rural area, some amount of the rural area in its rural state. So I really do think we need to look at it again to make sure that we have a consistent policy. And in this case, I think we need to follow that.
Thank you, Ms. Donegan. Mr. Murphy, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. George Bryan,
No.
Melinda Dunnigan,
No.
Walter Farabee,
Yes.
Jason Grubbs,
Yes.
Clarence Lamb,
Yes.
Chris Leak,
Yes.
Mo McCray,
Yes.
Brenda Smith,
Yes.
and Jack Stillman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman and Board, that vote is 7-2 to recommend approval. Mr. Chairman, I believe that brings us to item B9 on your agenda, and that is the text amendment, UDO CC11, and that's the storage services retail case. And for that, we'll hear from Tiffany White.
May I ask a quick question? I'm so sorry. So am I done? And the only reason I ask, I have a funeral family visitation to go to. May I be excused?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
I am? Okay, very good. Thank you guys so much.
You'll be getting something in the mail that tells you when your case will go to the county commissioners.
Great. Thanks so much, you
All right.
guys. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I am here tonight to present UDO CC 11, which is a request by Planning and Development Services staff to amend sections 5 and 11 of the UDO to revise the use standards for storage services retail. Just some quick background. Over the past few years, staff has seen an increase in requests for self-storage buildings, especially those that have internal access. These facilities have become the dominant self-storage model in many communities, and many of them have been located near neighborhoods. As part of its review of these facilities in the past, the Planning Board has recommended modifications to the design to help these projects better fit in with the character of the surrounding communities. As part of the work program for this year, the Planning Board asked staff to research best practices and develop some basic standards for storage facilities to better reflect expectations for such projects during the plan review stage and to reduce the negotiation required for these individual projects. Based on the research and best practices, staff is proposing different standards for external access and internal access storage facilities. And these amended standards will not affect existing storage services retail. They'll only apply to new development going forward. So the proposed external access standards, these are the types of units, the traditional type of one-story units that are accessed from the exterior via roll-up doors. Outdoor storage for properties such as RV and boats is allowed with these kinds of facilities, but they must be screened in HB and GB zoning. And hazardous materials storage is prohibited. So those are basically the standards for those external access facilities. For internal access facilities, because we're seeing more of these and the locations that they're going, we're proposing more robust standards, including specified siding materials like stone, brick, and architectural detailing. Exterior storage would not be allowed with this use in any of the zoning districts that allowed this use specifically. Windows and transparency are proposed along the public-facing facades, and the building facades must be articulated to avoid long, uninterrupted walls and to help with that compatibility with the neighborhoods. Some other proposed changes, we propose allowing internal access storage units to expanded districts in GOLB and MRBS, given its similar impacts to other uses allowed in these districts. Internal access storage in the PB district, which is currently allowed by special use zoning, would be approved by the Planning Board during a Planning Board review, and a mix of non-residential uses would be required along the street level right of way in this district. Staff is proposing some additional changes to storage retail service standards in response to the Planning Board feedback that we received at the May work session. including clarifying rules for projects which include both internal and external access buildings, those hybrid projects. I showed you the language at the May work session that we were going to add to the provision. We also clarified the alternative compliance provisions to make those a little clearer on what we wanted during those potential compliance, and modifying the PD district standards to clarify the requirements for those mix of uses adjacent to the street level right of way. We also researched the board's question about LB zoning in activity centers. Given the limited amount of LB zoning within the activity centers that we have countywide and the other uses allowed in the LB district, staff believes internal access storage would be compatible with this district's character as well. Staff believes that the proposed revisions to storage services retail standards will provide clarity in the project review process and reduce the need for such projects to be negotiated on an individual basis. The proposed standards for internal access buildings, including building materials requirements, will also enhance the compatibility of these projects with surrounding businesses and neighborhoods. So with that, staff recommends approval of VDO CC 11. And I am happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, Ms. White.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question about the research you did on the LB zoning.
Yeah.
You said there was a limited amount of that. Can you quantify that a little bit more?
Sure. So there are 46 activity centers countywide. Of those 46, 16 included LB zoning. Of those 16, 11 had zoning districts that would already allow storage services retail like LB and HB. So there were 5 zoning activity centers where LB would be the zoning district that would allow internal access storage facilities of the 46 total. And then again, as I mentioned, we looked at the use list for the LB zoning district. And because of the types of uses that were allowed in LB, some of them more impactful than internal storage services, we determined that it was a compatible use for this district.
Okay, so just to clarify, how many have LB of the 46? Can you go over that again?
Yeah.
There were 46 activity centers that had LB.
No, there are 46 total.
Okay.
16 of those
16.
have LB.
Yeah.
And of those 16, only 5 had LB exclusively that would allow this use. The other 11 also had HB, GB, that type of zoning that would currently allow this use as well.
Okay, so the other 11 had other districts that would allow the use.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Ms. White, this is Clarence.
Yeah.
This ordinance, the way I understand it, it would not impact any repurposing of other types of structures, like an office building, for example. If you had an office building that's not performing its intended function economically and you wanted to convert it, this really doesn't apply. They're not going to have to create articulations. This is an office building would almost by definition be one that you have to go into the building to get to your storage unit. This ordinance would not apply to that at all.
So you're talking about adaptive use in buildings?
Yeah, adaptive use, yes.
That's a great question. I'm not as familiar with the adaptive use regulations, but I think I'll let Chris answer that.
You know, that generally speaking, I would say that's correct. You know, if you're going into an existing structure, an existing office building, more than likely it's already going to meet the material requirements. Articulation, you know, you're more than likely already going to have doors and windows and those kind of things. So, you know, that if you're going in and taking a building and modifying the exterior and, you know, adding on to it, then it's kind of a hybrid. But if you're just taking an existing, you know, a good example of that would be the former McLean trucking site down at Walltown, Sprague, and 52, which actually has been converted to storage services retail. all the internal storage services retail of the existing building, they would not have had to meet these requirements because they did no exterior modification. Now in the rear where they added additional structures, and those kind of things, they would have to meet those requirements, you know, whatever would be applicable to that. But the converting the existing structure would not require that because they didn't make any exterior modifications.
Okay.
If I could have a minute, and I'll really try to keep it very focused and to the point, because I know we're all going brain crazy to a degree right now. I commend the staff on the work that's been done and totally support the goals that are intended. I'm not so sure that the draft language that we're reading tonight will enable us to accomplish those goals. By example, in the photograph we saw a little bit ago of the storage facility on Robin Hood Road, and I haven't gone by there to pull a tape measure on them, but I think each of those walls are less than 100 feet in length. And unless I'm reading the draft language incorrectly, it says that articulation will be required on any wall of greater than 100 feet. That seems to me to suggest that there would in this new scenario, there would be no articulation required on any of those walls. And I don't think that's what we're trying to accomplish. The proposed table of zones and uses includes pedestrian district. And I will say I can literally never remember the last time I saw someone walking up Robin Hood Road with a sofa on their back to get it into one of these storage units. This is a non-pedestrian use, and that's okay in areas that are zoned for a more mixed use or commercial use than those that we have specifically set aside for pedestrian business. We have mentioned briefly the desire to make some of the street level frontage. What I believe the intent is a use more like retail or office, but the language currently before us talks about a mixture of use of non-residential uses. And from a really anal point of view, non-residential could include many storage units. I don't think that's our intent. So I would like to ask that we spend some time to work on the language to be sure it supports our intentions, either right now or before going forward.
Chair, I mean, I don't know if the public that's watching this knows that we had a work session and we discussed this, but there are several issues which these buildings bring up, and the downtown of Winston-Salem has been very susceptible to this. Of course, I would love to see a UDO that didn't just center on storage buildings, but centered on walkability and the flow and vitalizing retail and blocks and neighborhoods, regardless of the type of use of building. But this one is on retail, because we already know in the West End what happened to the old Sears building in Wachovia. It killed 5th Street behind it. It killed 4th Street in front of it by transferring it into a non-used or frequented area. And I'm sure the planning staff remembers the plan a number of years ago where Krispy Kreme was going to take a block and develop a central office that was going to be all focused toward an inner courtyard. And the planning staff was very much aware that that would kill the outside area there, and was working with the developer on that, just because they understood how that was going to affect traffic, retail, vitalization of the community. So I read Mr. Stillman's comments that he circulated to us, and I appreciated that. And I would like to propose a motion of approval if this is the appropriate time to do that.
We haven't held the public hearing yet. I don't believe anyone has signed up to speak, but I just want to make sure that I get that out there. I don't see anyone on the call necessarily. I know Drew Gersmeyer's here, but he's here for the next text amendment. I don't want to presume he doesn't want to speak on this, nor Luke, but they haven't signed up to.
Are there any further questions for staff at this point? All right. Mr. Murphy, do we have anyone here to speak on this case?
Not that has signed up, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Seeing no one, I'm going to declare the public hearing closed. What is the pleasure of the board?
I'd like to make a motion, Mr. Chair.
All right. Yes, sir.
I would like to move that we approve this with certain amendments. I'm very supportive of storage units and how they should fit in, but in listening to the discussion, trying to make some amendments in the language that's presented. So leaving paragraph, you call it paragraph A as it is, in paragraph B, which is storage services, comma, retail dash internal access, in number 3, to change that facades should be compatible in scale and rhythm with surrounding structures. And period. If not held to another standard by surrounding structures, facades greater than 100 feet in linear length should be articulated with recesses or projections which total at least 25%, and follow on with that sentence as the staff has written that. Leaving number 4 alone, leaving number 5 alone, and in number 6, saying in the PB and LB districts, A, storage services retail in the PB and LB districts require special use permits. B, the street level of storage services and retail buildings which front a public right-of-way must be incorporated with additional non-storage service, non-residential uses allowed in the district adjacent to said right-of-way, and these uses must occupy at least 50% of the interior space adjacent. I think that's trying to address Mr. Steelman's concern that it isn't clear that non-residential could be storage or something along those lines. So with those minor changes, I would like to move approval.
Mr. Bryan, excuse me, I see Mr. Murphy's hand is raised.
I just wanted to get clarification on, could you repeat under B3 what the first sentence was?
Facades should be compatible in scale and rhythm with surrounding structures.
What does rhythm mean? What do you mean by that?
Well, the planning people were probably better prepared in this because they've used this language before. If this was a storage building in the downtown, what you'd want it to be would be somehow fit in with a smaller storefront footage, and so addressing Mr. Steelman's thing, or at least I hope I am, that you would then have that articulation in that. In other words, what I'm trying to do with this is to give the staff the ability to negotiate the appropriate design before they ever bring it to us. So that those things get worked out, and they can still look at these other issues.
And I think one of the things we're trying to do is to not do a negotiation on every one of these deals. I think we're trying to come up with some guidelines that prevents us from having to do exactly what you're talking about.
Well, the problem is that that's my motion. I don't know if we're in the discussion portion yet. So.
Yeah, Kirk, I see your hand. Kirk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bryan, I also had another question just to make sure that staff and the board is clear on your motion. On item 6, subletter A, where you mentioned storage service retail in the PB and LB district requires a special use permit. I presume that would be an elected body special use permit?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
That's let's give some opportunity to the neighbors to do something. Planning board review really provides no greater input. So that's my motion. I don't know whether there's a second or not, Mr. Chair.
Okay. There is a motion on the floor by Mr. Bryan. Is there a second?
I would like to second Mr. Bryan's motion. And just if I can make a comment, that does meet my main concern about LB. A PB was a concern, but I appreciate what the staff's done that research, and I understand the reasoning, but I still think that, it's worth looking, especially with the 5 activity centers, LB and HB, to look at these on a case. And there are instances where it's appropriate, others where it's maybe not so appropriate. I understand. I appreciate also the changes that would make the interior accessed storage facilities more attractive. I think that's important. But I think also that we need to think about the use itself, not just the appearance. And I see storage as more akin to warehousing, and that's why I don't see it so. I understand the staff said they feel like it fits with the uses of LB, but LB doesn't allow warehousing. And I think this is more of a warehousing type use, and rather than an office type use. It may look like an office from an appearance standpoint, but it doesn't function that way.
All right, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Is there any?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know about anybody else. I would love it if we could table this and see George's proposed revision in writing. We've been at this for going on 3 hours now. We've all fussed about our UDO and some of the housekeeping that it needs. And I just feel like everybody's probably not at a point where they're going to want to vote on a text amendment with a bunch of verbal amendments. Maybe staff's got it all written down. And if you guys tell us you understand and George, I don't necessarily oppose your motion. It's a whole lot of changes to be processing orally on something that's going to be written down.
Yeah.
I think Kirk, I'm sorry.
I'm with Jason.
I think Kirk may want to jump in. I will say, I think we reasonably know kind of what the changes are. With that being said, I don't know that they're in a state that you as a board have the ability to read them. And, obviously you don't have them in front of you. I don't know whether you can digest them. I think Kirk wants to add on to that probably real quickly, but before he does, the one thing I did want to talk about was one of the reasons why when we were looking at this, and one of the reasons why, it was our storage services are already allowed in PB with a elected body special use permit, and not allowed in LB. And the reasons why we were considering doing, adding those as districts is, again, I think it's been very well documented and discussed by the board. They're not truly, walkable neighborhood serving scale and necessarily compatible. But one of the things we were trying to do with this is, as we have seen, these are becoming a more near neighborhood type use. So what we were trying to do was to allow these with higher standards into those districts to relieve pressure from requests for folks wanting to come in and rezone to HB and GB. So that was kind of our rationale behind what we did. And again, it's ultimately, it's up to the board's for the recommendation, and ultimately up to the elected body as far as what they want to do. But that kind of explains our rationale as to why it's before you the way it is. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kirk, who may want to elaborate on that.
Thanks, Chris. And Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to follow up with what Mr. Grubbs was suggesting about if the board did decide they wanted to see this in writing, this wouldn't necessarily derail things significantly. We could have that language ready next week and send it out. Since the public hearing's already been closed, the board could vote on this at work session. We've got the capacity, since we actually are looking like we only have one item for work session at this point. So just wanted to make sure the board was aware of that it wouldn't necessarily require a continuance until July.
Okay, so I think what we need to do, because this really is talking about design standards and we're going into PPLB, I think the first thing, there's still a motion on the floor that we need to follow through on. And then if that motion fails or you rescind your motion, then we can see about continuing this to our work session.
Mr. Chair, I would not be opposed to delaying this. In fact, I'm hearing from the neighborhoods that they just saw the language of this past weekend, and they are concerned that with many issues that they just don't understand at this point and haven't been able to take it to their neighborhood associations at this point. Okay. So I am not opposed to rescinding if the board wants to consider the language at a time where we have more time.
Okay, is anyone on the board opposed to continuing this to look at the language? All right, so without objection, I think we can just say that we're going to move forward, or does it need to go before a vote?
I believe we probably need to have a vote just to make it formal.
All right.
What
if George amends his motion to propose amended language instead of moving that we approve the text amendment with the amended language?
I would like to move that this item be continued to be discussed in further detail at our upcoming work session with the input at that time from the board and the professional staff as well.
There's a motion on the floor by Mr. Stillman. Is there a second?
I'd second.
Second by Mr. Bryan. Any further discussion? Mr. Murphy, would you please call the roll?
Yes, sir. George Bryan.
Yes.
Melinda Dunnigan.
Yes.
Walter Farabee.
Yes.
Jason Grubbs.
Yes.
Clarence Lamb.
Yes.
Chris Leak.
Yes.
Mo McCray.
Yes.
Brenda Smith.
Yes.
And Jack Stillman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman of the board, that's unanimous to continue this to work session, and we'll have something drafted up and send it out to you next week.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, with that, we are now to item B10. This is a text amendment UDO CC 12. We'll hear from Gary Roberts briefly, and I know the petitioner is here and probably available to answer any questions. I don't know that we necessarily need a presentation from them, but I know they are here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Yes, very brief presentation. This is UDO CC 12. It's requested by Hank Perkins to modify table 511 principal use table in the UDO to allow the use of schools and religious institutions in the E Entertainment District. A little bit of background. The E District was established in 2012, you may remember, for the purpose of accommodating a mixture of retail, office, residential, and entertainment, indoor and outdoor related uses within growth management areas 1 and 2, Since that time, multiple E district rezonings have been approved in the northeast section of downtown. Just to add on, it's we probably got about 45 acres of E and EL districts in that area. Associated with the E district was the use of entertainment facility large was created, and that use may include indoor and outdoor events and large occupancies with amplified music. An analysis generally considering the contemplative nature of schools and religious institutions, these uses were initially excluded from the E district due to trying to minimize potential land use incompatibilities. However, both of these uses are very pedestrian oriented. They both require a lot of people, and the request would allow these two uses. Churches would be a use by right, and the use of school and private and public would be a planning board review within the E district as proposed. Also in recent years, projects have been proposed which would establish a significant residential presence within the E district boundaries that I mentioned earlier. So given this evolution of the changing E district and the development patterns in that area, staff believes the inclusion of these uses, these institutional uses, is appropriate. And again, I mentioned they are pedestrian oriented uses, and it would further the district's intent of fostering a walkable mixed use area. So staff does recommend approval, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Mr. Roberts.
Yes.
Would adding this to the E district in any way change the requirements for parking for schools?
Well, those requirements are within the E district. So if somebody wanted to build a church or a school within the E district, those parking situations that are exemptions that are allowed in the E district would still apply. I believe they have to provide a parking study. So that would be applicable, yes.
So it wouldn't necessarily be the requirements that go with the use school. It would be the parking for the E district that would take precedence.
That's correct.
Okay.
As well as the other district standards in regard to the pedestrian accommodations.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other questions for staff? All right, seeing none. Mr. Murphy, do we have anyone here to speak on this case?
Mr. Chairman, we do have both Drew Gersmeyer and Luke Dickey here. I'm not sure if they want to speak or not, but they are both here, and I'll turn it over to them.
Yeah, this is Luke with Stimel Associates again, 601 North Trade Street, Suite 200, 27101. There's as mentioned by Gary in his presentation, there has been quite a big expansion of the E district there on the north side of downtown. And along with that, we have in recent times have had interest by school systems and also by churches to be located in those areas as well. We view these uses as compatible within the E district, as Gary had mentioned. And typically they are in the morning hours or in the early day afternoon hours. So anything that typically is within entertainment district from a loud music standpoint or anything like that happens in the later evening hours. So that would not necessarily be incompatible with the E district, and it is trying to create more of an opportunity for a mixed use, so that you actually have the live, work, play in the entertainment district as well throughout all hours of the day. Accommodate these types of uses. And I know there's probably certain churches that are not quite as contemplative as they like to get outside their walls now, and also might like the opportunity to have music outdoors or services outdoors too, when that allows. So we feel that these are the compatible uses within the entertainment district, and just want to broaden the horizon of what can go into these districts as well. So I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you so very much. Any questions?
Of staff?
Yes, of staff.
All right, thank you. Yeah, I'm just scratching my head trying to come up with the wording for the question. In the future, are there any distancing requirements. That, for instance, a new bar would have to be so far away from a school or a church that this would prevent the continued growth of both.
We haven't discussed that.
There's nothing in the UDO. I can't speak to what state law requires from an ALE standpoint. I don't know whether Luke knows, but there isn't anything in the ordinance. It's not like it's a space dependent use where you have to be so far away from something else. And like I said, I don't believe there's anything similar to that in state law either.
I would love to see both. I just don't want to shoot one foot on behalf of saving the other.
Or how about a sex offender who has bought a condo downtown who has to stay 1,000 feet away from a primary school?
Again, you can get into those kind of situations all the time. You know, basically, you know, if a school exists and they are a registered sex offender, then, you know, before they move or as they move, they have to go through the process with, you know, the state and their parole officer, whoever. But it doesn't necessarily work in the reverse of that, where if you're a school or a church and you go, and again, I don't think there's, it doesn't work in the reverse. So, I mean, theoretically, you're going there, and if you had a concern, you would have checked it out yourself before you went there. So I don't think it would disqualify a church from going there just because a sex offender would be within the specified distance. Or excuse me, a school.
I must say, I am flabbergasted by this. I thought when I was voting for an entertainment district, I was voting for something that allowed adults to have a good time, do a variety of things, and it was a place where this could really be condoned and really encouraged and stuff like that. I am surprised that we're creating UDOs because people want to sell land. Why can't they just go back, get that parcel of land re-back zoned and get it sold that way, rather than encroaching on an entertainment district that had great purpose behind it and really portended to build on what it was saying and keep these little issues like bars close to this and adult facilities close to that and other things from interfering. I'm just amazed because that isn't what I voted for when I voted for entertainment districts.
Are there any other questions or thoughts? If not, I'm going to close the public hearing.
Mr. Chairman, this is Clarence. I move that the planning board recommend approval of UDO CC12.
Motion by Mr. Lamb.
Second.
Second by Mr. Grubbs. Any discussion? Mr. Murphy, would you please call the roll?
George Bryan?
No.
Melinda Dunnigan?
Yes.
Walter Farabee?
Yes.
Jason Grubbs?
Yes.
Clarence Lamb?
Yes.
Chris Leak?
Yes.
Mo McCray?
Yes.
Brenda Smith?
Yes.
And Jack Stillman?
Yes.
All right, Mr. Chairman, that is recommended for approval with an 8-1 vote.
Okay. I think the next item on the agenda is the work program. And you know, we've been at this for 3 hours, and I would so that we can give Kirk a fair take at this, I would maybe consider taking this up at work session. Does anybody disagree with that? If you want to take it up now, we can, but everybody's okay with that?
Great idea.
All right, so we will take that at work session. Thank you. All right, anything on the staff report?
Mr. Chairman of the board, I don't have anything myself. I will turn it over to Kirk, who'll give you a work session preview. And I think we've added 2 items to that tonight. So it's expanded by 3. And then after Kirk does the work session preview, I'll turn it over to Desmond to give you a preview of your July cases.
Thank you, Chris, and board members. Again, as we mentioned earlier in the meeting, the main event is going to be having Courtney Driver come back and talk about proposed utility expansions at the edges of the Muddy Creek sewer service basin that our CCUC system utilizes. And that's certainly going to be something that the board is going to want to consider as we look at the comp plan update and the GMA changes that are always part of that process. We're going to be having UDO CC 11, Tiffany's Storage Services text amendment come back. And as we mentioned earlier, we'll get some language sent out to you all with the agenda. And lastly, we'll go ahead and carry over the work program. We'll get a vote on that from you all so we can go ahead and start moving things along July 1. And with that, I don't have anything further. So I'll turn it over to Desmond for the cases coming up at your July public hearing.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, we have 2 new zoning petitions for next month and then 1 continued case. One of the cases, we would have had another case that was also continued, but it was actually withdrawn earlier today. We will also have another text amendment and 2 planning board review items.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, that's all we have as far as staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Director, for chairing the meeting tonight. And the next time you chair, I don't know if it's going to be 3 hours, but we'll see if we can beat this record.
I did my best. Sorry.
Is there anything else for the good of the order?
Now, I have a recommendation for Mr. Murphy. If he wants to try doing alphabetical by first name next time, might change it up a little easier to remember.
Well, I will show you that the alphabetical order was right on all these except for the one I got called out on. And it was actually wrong. That's the only place on this whole thing it was wrong. But it was wrong.
The only reason I'm sensitive to it is because it messed me all up when Walter.
Well, I didn't even realize it until I looked at it. I'm like, yeah, all the rest of them are right besides that
meeting,
one.
you're getting rid of me already.
Actually, I like it. It gives me more time to get my act together.
All right. Well, with that little bit of closing laughter, which is good to hear, a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second? All right. Everyone have a great evening.
All right.
Good night. Thanks.
Good night.
Thanks all.